Okay. Okay. Well, we are, those of you who have read it, we'll be we'll be having a discussion at the end, and those of you who have not read it, please get out to your local bookstore, pick it up, and read it and enjoy the next week of.
Check it out here.
Yes, yes, yes. But definitely as we have the week of festivities coming up. My name is Karen Vocke, and I'm a professor in the English department at Western Michigan University. One of the focal points of the work that I do involves migrant farm workers. And I've been involved with the Latino community in every way, shape, and form for many, many years. My entrance into that community was working as a migrant Head Start teacher in the early 1980s. Not because I was necessarily the most qualified applicant, but because A, I spoke Spanish, and B, I had an education degree. Never mind that I'm a secondary educator. That experience, though, it was a quick learning curve, and it turned out to be one of the motivating forces of my life. Going to the camps and being the one to be honored to be in that position of being, if you know migrant farm worker camps, they're not exactly the most luxurious places to live. So I've been involved with migrant farm workers in the Latino community for many years, both in Ohio and in Michigan. I've also, in the past couple of years, I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with some educators in the Rio Grande Valley near McAllen, in some of the districts around McAllen, Texas. That is where a lot of our migrants locally, and I do a lot of work in Hart, Michigan, in northern Michigan. A lot of the students migrate between here and the Rio Grande Valley. So learning about both sides of the picture, probably about a year ago, enabled my life to come full circle in some ways. And crossing that border, it was very interesting when I went down to the valley. I've been down there about 3 times in the last couple of years. My friends are saying, don't go over the river, don't go over the river. Well, even though, because of the drug war, I didn't go over as I had many years ago. I've been to Tijuana, I've been to some of the places in the book, and I still felt, though, that I had crossed a border. I had gone and made a segue. I became something out of my comfort zone, and becoming, I find words hard to explain, but it's added another dimension to my own work and to my life, and I feel that's really important for me as an educator and as an activist in the community. I've titled my talk, Into the Beautiful North and Crossing Borders Along the Way. And what I'd like you to think about tonight as we go through the PowerPoint here and as we go through our discussion is to think about the borders that you might cross. And basically by a border, I mean when we cross the line, when we enter into another dimension, when we come full circle, when we experience something very new in our lives and that becomes a part of us. We're going to define that border very, very loosely. However, all the time, because we experience interactions with others in our lives, and we also experience the text. I like to think of this book as a work of art that we experience, and I'll explain a little bit of theory behind that in a moment. I'm going to be stepping back and forth as I do my computer. Let's hope it works. Publishers Weekly says that Urrea's poetic sensibility and journalistic eye for detail in painting the Mexican landscape and sociological complexities create vivid, memorable scenes. Though the Spanglish can be tough for the uninitiated to detangle, the colorful characters, strong narrative, and humor carry this surprisingly uplifting and very human story. What I loved about this book was the fact that many of the sociological issues, poverty, racism, all of these things that are prevalent throughout our society, they were very much a part of this book. Yet I found so much hope and humor and life in this book. Because I'm a Spanish speaker, I had a lot of chuckles. I was actually sitting at home last Sunday rereading the book, and I'm sitting there literally laughing, and my husband was trying to figure out, what are you laughing at? You've got to read the book. But this book, I think, is one of the strong portrayals of the Mexican people, the resilience, and it paints a picture too of the different types of reception that people get in the United States. My next slide is a cover of the book, and I just put up a thing of Mexico, where we go up and then we move over, obviously, into Kankakee, Illinois. It's a very vivid description of the journey along the way. I'd like to start off with a little bit of the Spanglish. Is this familiar? This guy familiar to anybody? Okay, this is a Japanese actor, Toshiro Mifune. He's the model for Atomico, and I had to really go look on the internet because at the end where they talk about, she's walking with a monkey, I didn't get that image until I actually went here and saw Mifune's picture. Okay. I am Atomico. He hopped off his mound and passed behind her. Who are you? He demanded. None of your business. Ooh, saucy. She walked 3 rows away from him. Go away, she said. Never. I'm busy. I am here to serve you. Oh, please. She had heard better lines than that. Atomico was the kind of man given to visions and illuminations. Since they'd closed the dump, he had wondered what the Buddha had in store for him. Would he follow the trash to Tecate? Hell no. He wasn't some country boy. He was a city dog. Perhaps he could mine the old garbage like the old-timers who were now digging in the sides of the hill. But the trash mafia that the owners had hired to police the slopes would beat the miners if they caught them. Atomico had entered into several fights already, defending the peasants from the hired guns. Think about the allusion to our Magnificent Seven. But nah, climbing in stinking dark holes wasn't for him. This is Atomico, or the model upon which the character of the book was based. We also have this underlying issue of the Magnificent Seven. How many of you have seen the Magnificent Seven? It's been many years. I have to confess, I loved Yul Brynner. He's long gone now, but to watch a movie with Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen is a joy, and that will be shown here at the library, Karen?
At Kalamazoo Valley Museum.
Okay, but it will be available, so that will be shown as part of the events coming up. Let's add a little bit to some of the scene. Okay, I don't know, how many of you have traveled in Mexico and gone over the border? Okay, some of you will see this familiar. But what I wanted to do is show you some things. I've been there. This is the border fence. This is where it is in Tijuana. You really don't want to go over to Tijuana. There's a lot of drug stuff going on now. Last time I was over probably was about 10 years ago, and it's a very typical, very aptly described in the book. I think of the police driving up and down. In the Rio Grande Valley, how many of you have been to McAllen, Brownsville area? There you just have a very lazy river. And feasibly, you could get on a little raft and float to the other side. I know things are in place that would stop me from doing that. Even at one point down in the Rio Grande Valley, there's a little ferry that goes across. It can hold about 2 cars, and very interesting. But there's a lot of security now on the border, and it's much more difficult for people to cross. But the one in Arizona, in California, is where the strong. This is a place I've never been. This is a place I've never been. I don't know if I want to go. This is the Tijuana dump. This is where Atomico staked his territory. This is where people live. This is where there's a mafia that defends the dump. If you remember the vivid descriptions of the housing and how people make do of this slumdog. What was I'm blanking. That's another similar, parallel that we can draw. I think we're becoming much more attuned to some of these scenarios. But these are some things I just wanted to set the visual for you. But this is actually where the Tijuana dump. They mentioned that somebody in the small town had gone to Michigan to work in fruit or something. This is actually a migrant camp. How many of you visited a migrant camp here in Michigan? Okay.
I'm going for 10 years.
Okay.
Or 12 at our church.
Very good. I'm not going to say where this is because I went out with a recruiter at a local school district, and this actually we went out in November. She was actually allowed to be there, so I went too, but I took pictures, and there's an irony there in children at play. Over there, that's a shower and bathhouse. This is at a migrant camp that is west of Kalamazoo. I can't say where. Ironically, the next spring, I went out to the same place. There's a lot of glass. Little kids were playing in the. It's pretty bad. Not all growers, but this is very typical of what you can find. There are a lot of old trailers. There are many growers who do the best by their workers, but then there are some who do the minimum possible. And this is one of the things that it breaks my heart. I go out and work with my area's literacy, and when you see the children, it's dangerous. Each of these little houses had its own outhouse. Very, very grim conditions. So I just wanted to kind of set the tone for what you might see, in some of the cases related. Anybody been to Kankakee, Illinois? Okay, here's I don't know, beautiful downtown Kankakee, Illinois. I just was trying to set the visual. One of the reasons I loved this book so much was that I felt in a way that I entered into it. I had this ongoing, I still have a relationship with that book. I see that book as a work of art. Performance art, maybe? I don't know. What I'd like to do right now is take a look at a theoretical perspective that can kind of set the tone for the way that we choose to read a book. How many of you just get lost in a book? Why do you get lost in a book? Could I have a couple of reasons? What might make you get lost in a book? You feel like you're living it. And what makes you feel like you're living it? I heard two things. What?
Well, it grabs you.
It grabs you, yeah. And you said something? The character development. Maybe there's something in you that you know somebody, or there are many reasons why we relate. I have a friend of mine read the book and she doesn't understand. And that's her, she reads stuff I don't like. So, we're still cool. But we talk about reader response theory, and this can be the explanation for why we react to literature as we do. And as an English professor, I feel obligated to bring some of this stuff to the table. You're not going to get a 2-hour lecture. These are just some of the major highlights. We have many different ways of critiquing literature. We have Marxist approaches, we have feminist, we have all of those. We're not going to go there tonight. Is that okay? Yeah, are you sure? I have a couple of my students here, and they're going, yes, please, Karen, please. What I want to point out is that reader response is a way of entering into and engaging with the text that allows you to use any other approach you want. but it's a way of, of interacting with that text. So there are two basic foundational beliefs about reader response theory. One is that the role of the reader cannot be omitted from the understanding of literature. This is in contrast to many literary theories that say, oh, the book is what it is. You can't. It believes that we bring ourselves and our experience to the text. And secondly, we do not passively consume, okay, but rather we actively make meaning. And I have an old joke, it's a really corny joke that I used to use with my students. I used to put a book on my head and say it doesn't work by osmosis. That it soaks in. No, you have to read it and engage with it. So it usually brings a few chuckles. But this is, some of the foundation. Reader response, it still brings in other approaches to literacy, and it's a way of explaining the diversity and often divergence of our responses to literary works. And here's where my friend who works at the university, she's in the English department, I didn't like the book. Okay, fine, why? Well, I didn't understand all the Spanglish, and she had a number of other reasons. But she'll read a book, and I'm going, why do you like that? Well, it's magnificent, and the characters are, I'm going, I thought they were kind of flat. So, but that's okay, because we come from very different backgrounds. But it allows us to see why we might engage, okay? And it's a really good way of, I found this is a good way of explaining this to resistant readers, a lot of high school kids. I don't know, some of you, my folks better know this. Louise Rosenblatt, this is a name. In 1938, Louise Rosenblatt caused a stir when she introduced the concept of reader response about interpretation of poetry. In addition, Stanley Fish, I'm sure some of this, he suggests that literature exists. It signifies when it is read. In other words, literature is an entity. When it's read, that's when it really comes into its existence. And that its force can affect people in many, many different ways, often many different ways, each time it's read, okay? Whether aloud or personally. Iser's another person who has really gotten into this more, who says that there are gaps or blanks, and the reader fills in blanks, and that's what makes our experience personal, okay? They aren't in the text, but they're incited or influenced by the text. Okay, who's a reader and what is reading? The reader is active, that's what Rosenblatt says. And Stanley Fish, who some people believe is really divergent from Rosenblatt, he says that reading is something you do. Wow. There are later critics who say that reader responses can be very deeply psychological. You believe that? I think sometimes books can really emotionally affect us, and that it's more than just an interaction, and it can be something really, really profound. So personal, deep-seated psychological need. And so there are some other theorists who have studied that. But the field is increasingly being referred to as reader-oriented criticism, considering the very important role that you, the reader, bring to the text. And this is really important because it allows you, the reader, to have that most important impact on the way a book is read, but more importantly, how a book is known. Does this make sense to everybody? Some of you may well be familiar with this. We're not here to do the English class lecture, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea about where I am coming from. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the way that I've been really thinking about the ways in which this book spoke to me. How did I engage with the text? And I thought of some of the different ways. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I am going to talk a little bit about the linguistic. There's a lot of Spanglish in this book. There's a lot of it that's written phonetically. If you sound it out, you kind of start hearing it as, I think Urrea meant it to be said in your head. I don't know about you, but I sure had a little videotape going in my head. Anybody have a movie in your head of this? I did. If you haven't read it, you got to go do it. But the linguistic, I worked with the migrant farm workers, and I had to converse with the parents. My Spanish was pretty proper Spanish. I had to learn a new way of speaking. And oh my goodness, some of the things in this book came back to me. There were some terms that they weren't necessarily nice terms. I don't know if I'm comfortable saying them in polite company, but there were some naughty words in there in Spanish that I had forgotten all about. Well, guess what? I remembered them. Okay? I certainly learned those being in a migrant camp. I had a couple people who had very colorful speech. So a lot of the linguistic features, if you go to the Rio Grande Valley, you have to kind of retune. So I've also done some work in Cuba, and more recently I've done work in Cuba, and I get really conflicted a lot about my Cuban Spanish and my Mexican and my Tex-Mex Spanish. So it kind of, but I really related to the book because it helped me to understand, and it really fit the story. Sociocultural, I'm middle class. I'm white, I'm middle class. The interesting thing for me is that I continue to go to migrant camps, and here's my philosophy. They're not the ones who are privileged to get me there. I'm the one who's privileged to be invited into their home. Okay, I really feel that way because I honor, I believe in what, I know many migrant families very well. They're the hardest working, most honorable people, some of the best people I know. So it's an honor for me to be invited into their homes. Economic, educational. For me, I've always had continuous education. So me looking at interrupted education, I've been really studying that. Texas has one set of criteria. Michigan has another. Kids aren't graduating from high school. It's getting better because people are trying to communicate better. There's a national database that has kids credit, but it's still a struggle. Families often, they move contingent on the crops. So that's been a real a mission of mine. And I'm an advocate for children, and I believe very much that we need to provide educational continuity. And I've done a lot of work with summer migrant programs. We have those in Michigan where the kids, usually migrant farm workers in Michigan, they come in April, May, and stay maybe through October. This is a blanket. It all depends on the crops. We have a very rich fruit belt along the lake shore. But during that time, our kids, they're with us, and a lot of the kids are out working, but many districts provide summer programs that will enhance educational continuity. Interpersonal, I just being in that very welcoming and personal. I've had a lot of, if you ever want to, sit down and have a conversation with me, I would welcome it. I've had so much personal growth. I've crossed so many borders. And this book spoke to me. It reminded me of maybe where I was 30 years ago and where I've come. So I have a story. That's not why we're here tonight, but this book reminded me. How many of you, as you read the book, began to think of a life experience of your own? I may seeing some nods. Raise your hands if there was some. Okay. Okay, there are some dimensions of the book that I think we can consider. I know all of us are readers, and we experience a book in many different ways. And I know some of you have been at a book discussion group, and you might have talked about. There's some things that we talk about when we read a book. We talk about the author. We're going to learn more about the author as the week unfolds. I feel like I had a really big job here leading. He's a new author to me. I'm eager. I've just got The Devil's Highway. That's my next read. The author, that's really important. I'm looking forward to his being here. The mood of this book spoke to me so strongly. There are all the socio-political issues that I feel very strongly about and that I'm an activist and advocate for, but it's uplifting. It's not a despairing tone. And I read a lot of that. Not that we can't have that, but language. Even if you don't speak Spanish, I bet you walked away with a little more knowledge by reading this book. Very seriously. You walked away with a few more words of Spanish. That you never know, it might come in handy. Some of you might work with Spanish speakers. The style, the plot, the characters, the setting, theme, and the lens. How do we view it? Okay, there are many different lenses that we can look through at this work of literature. Creating meaning. Here's where I would like to have a little book discussion. Okay? And those of you who have read the book, I'm going to ask you to help out the folks who are not there yet. I know 3 people who are going to rush out maybe after class and buy the book. After class, this is not class. But these are my people, my wonderful students from Western. And so I would like you to think about. I have some leading questions. What I would like you to do is get in groups of maybe 3. Get in a small group